She almost killed my wife. That's not an exaggeration. One phone call, one cruel decision, and my wife's life was nearly stolen from us. And the worst part, it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some criminal lurking in the shadows. It was my own HOA president, an old woman with nothing better to do than wield her petty power like a weapon. She pretended to be my wife, called the hospital, and canceled every single one of her cancer treatments. Over parking violations, over Christmas lights, over grass being 1 inch too long. That one act could have ended my wife's fight with cancer right then and there. But she had no idea who she was messing with. My name is James Anderson. I'm 40 years old, a doctor, and the owner of St. Michael's Medical Center. I've spent my life saving people, but nothing could have prepared me for the fight I'd face in my own neighborhood. My wife Rachel was only 35 when the diagnosis hit us like a freight train, stage 3 breast cancer. I'll never forget sitting in that sterile room, the doctor's voice soft, like he was trying not to crush us completely. Aggressive, but treatable. We needed to start chemo immediately. Rachel cried that night. I did too. We held each other and whispered promises we weren't even sure we could keep. I told her, "You're going to beat this, and I'll be by your side every step of the way." Being the owner of the hospital, I had access to the best doctors, the best treatment plans. I thought that would give us some kind of shield from the chaos of life. But cancer doesn't care about titles, and apparently neither do Karens with clipboards. While Rachel fought for her life, our HOA president, Patricia Coleman, fought to control every inch of Riverside Gardens. Patricia was in her 60s, silver hair pulled back tight, eyes like ice. Everyone was afraid of her. She thrived on it. To her, rules weren't guidelines, they were gospel. And she enforced them with the zeal of a tyrant. Our grass 1/2 inch too tall. Violation. Our car parked slightly over the line. Violation. Christmas lights not removed quickly enough. Violation. I ignored the letters at first. I was busy keeping my wife alive. But Patricia doesn't take being ignored lightly. I'll never forget the day she showed up at my door with that clipboard clutched in her bony hands. Rachel was weak, curled up in bed, nausea racking her body after her second round of chemo. I cracked the door open, trying to keep my voice calm. "This isn't a good time, Patricia." She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect any property at any time." Then she pushed past me like she owned the place. I wanted to throw her out, but Rachel's voice floated weakly from the bedroom. "James, who is it?" Patricia didn't even hesitate. She opened the bedroom door and walked right in. There was my wife, pale bald, clutching a bucket because she could barely keep water down, and Patricia had the audacity to say, "This room is a mess. Medical supplies should not be visible. It violates aesthetic standards." My wife begged her to leave. Patricia just scribbled on her clipboard like Rachel's pain was an inconvenience, not a life or death battle. I forced her out, my hands shaking with rage. Rachel cried afterward, not from chemo, not from pain, but from humiliation. And in that moment, I knew Patricia was dangerous. But I didn't know just how far she would go. A week later, on the night before one of Rachel's most crucial treatments, I got an email from the hospital's scheduling system. Her chemo session had been canceled. I blinked confused, then reread the words a dozen times. Canceled. All of them. My heart slammed against my ribs. I called the cancer center immediately, my voice shaking. The night nurse hesitated, then told me, "It shows here the patient requested the cancellation." Someone called pretending to be Rachel. My blood ran cold. Rachel was asleep in the next room. She would never cancel her treatment. This wasn't a clerical error. This was sabotage. And when we traced the call, it came straight from Patricia Coleman's landline. Do you know what it feels like to realize someone has deliberately tried to kill the person you love? Not through a gun, not through poison, but with a phone call. That was the moment I knew this wasn't HOA harassment anymore. This was attempted murder. I drove to her house that night, fists pounding on her door. When she finally answered in her bathrobe, she acted annoyed, like I was the one inconveniencing her. I shouted, "You called my hospital and canceled my wife's cancer treatment." She smirked, denied it at first, then finally snapped, Your wife's endless medical deliveries and visitors are creating parking problems. I needed to send a message. A message. She risked my wife's life to prove a point about neighborhood parking. My vision blurred with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? I demanded. Missing one treatment could kill her. Patricia just crossed her arms and said, maybe if you followed the rules, this wouldn't happen. I leaned in, my voice low, deadly calm. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I own that hospital. I have the phone records. I have your voice on tape. And I'm going to bury you. For the first time, she looked afraid. But I wasn't bluffing. That night when I got home, I sat beside Rachel's bed and felt the weight of it all crash down on me. For the first time, I wondered if I was failing. I'm a doctor, a hospital owner, a husband, and yet I couldn't even protect my wife from a bitter old woman with a clipboard. I thought about giving up, about retreating, about focusing only on Rachel and letting the HOA win. What if fighting back only made things worse? What if I was putting her at more risk? For a split second, the thought of surrender tempted me. But then Rachel stirred her thin hand, clutching mine. Her voice was barely a whisper. Don't let her take this from us. Fight for me. That was all it took. In that fragile, desperate moment, she gave me the strength I didn't know I still had. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my legal team and security director. I laid out every piece of evidence, the call logs, the recorded voicemail, where Patricia's voice rang clear as day, pretending to be Rachel. We discovered she had stolen personal information from our mailbox to pass verification. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. Identity theft, insurance fraud, medical interference, all felonies. As we dug deeper, neighbors came forward with their own stories. Patricia had fined a family because their son needed a wheelchair ramp. She'd harassed an elderly woman for having a nurse visit too often. She'd threatened to call child services because a little girl played too loudly in her backyard. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. She targeted the vulnerable because she thought they couldn't fight back. But she was wrong about me. Police officers showed up at Patricia's house that very week. I watched from my window as she protested, flailing her arms while the cuffs snapped around her wrists. Neighbors poured onto their lawns, whispering, smirking, relieved. For years, they had lived in fear of her. Now they saw justice in motion. And it didn't stop there. At trial, Patricia sat at the defendant's table, her expensive lawyer whispering furiously in her ear, but nothing could change what she had done. The prosecution played the recording of her impersonating my wife, canceling every chemo session with chilling precision. They showed the jury our phone records. They put Rachel on the stand, frail, wearing a scarf to cover her head, her voice trembling as she said, "I thought I was going to die. I never canceled my treatment. Patricia Coleman did this to me because she cared more about parking rules than my life." The courtroom was silent. You could hear people sniffing, wiping their eyes. Even some jurors cried. Patricia's lawyer tried to paint her as a woman who made a mistake in judgment, but it fell apart under the weight of the evidence. Patricia herself only made it worse when she took the stand. "I didn't think it was that serious," she said. "I was just enforcing community standards." The jury looked disgusted. They deliberated for just 2 hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Identity theft, insurance fraud, interference with medical care. The judge glared at her as he read the sentence: 9 years in prison. Permanently banned from HOA leadership. Full restitution to every family she terrorized. Patricia collapsed in tears, begging for mercy, but it was too late. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there holding Rachel's hand, listening to the gavel slam down. Because that was the sound of justice, the sound of a tyrant falling. Patricia Coleman thought HOA power made her untouchable. She thought a clipboard and a title gave her the right to terrorize families and gamble with human lives. But power built on fear always crumbles, and in the end, her cruelty destroyed her. Never forget this: no rule, no HOA, no self-proclaimed authority is more important than human life.